This review from Thomas Cookson, rather long one, 25th of the 6th, 13, Who in Their Right Mind? Since being freshly remastered on DVD, The Twin Dilemma has been somewhat reappraised lately. YouTubers have commented positively on uploads of the story and on fan video tributes. Many fans now admit to liking the story. Gary Russell has said he liked the Sixth Doctor from the beginning. He was therefore the right man to oversee Big Finish's rehabilitation of him. That he emulated this new dangerous anti-hero Doctor in his 1984 audio-visual stories. Many fans say the scorn on Colin's era is largely retroactive, and that, if not for the cancellation, Colin in his debut wouldn't be so maligned or made pariahs of. Certainly, ever since Doctor Who returned to TV, the Twin Dilemma has ceased being the death knell it once was. I'm not a fan. I watched part 1 at age 17, and I vividly remember switching off after the first cliffhanger. That very scene seemed to achieve a critical mass of awfulness alone. Colin and Perry bickering over Hugo's wounded form, the insultingly ridiculous way Hugo immediately concludes that these people who've carried him to safety without even disarming him must be the ones who attacked him and prepares to execute the Doctor while still lying on the floor, who would only take a kick from the Doctor to disarm him. I couldn't even care whether Hugo did kill this utterly hateable new Doctor. This is before I ever saw the Caves of Androzani, so it's nonsense when fans desperately claim the Twin Dilemma fell victim to higher expectations. So what did the production team believe the story's appeal would be? Why was JNT prouder of this story than almost any other he'd produced? What were they thinking? I'll try to answer that without resorting to my Munchausen syndrome theory. Let's say this wasn't a planned disaster to feed some narcissistic martyr complex. Let's say J&T genuinely did think this is a step forward. I'm not sure J&T thought in terms of steps forward. He set out to be different and to make his mark, but I suspect he genuinely saw himself as a fill-in guy, just like Graham Williams. He wanted to make the show glossy and tightly reined. Sometimes he was neurotically controlling, other times incredibly fickle and negligent. Apparently he only wanted to do one season or leave on the Five Doctors, which in fact he banked on as being his proudest achievement, but given his neurotic conviction that the Five Doctors must be shown on the exact day of the anniversary, even though his 1973 predecessor wasn't, I mean seriously, put the Five Doctors at the beginning of season 20 and already you've got a better season opener and a more plausible explanation of Tegan's return via the time scoop. The BBC only let him produce it as part of season 21, and fan adulation kept drawing him back. There were other shows he apparently tried to launch and move on to, including a sequel to Compact, which the BBC rejected. Perhaps K9 and Company was one such failed escape route. J&T's approach was more about leaving viewers hanging and tantalised than about actual payoff. He was all about showmanship, pre-tension, continuity nods, and season-ender cliffhangers. The Twin Dilemma was business as usual then, but was positioned in a way that conclusively proved that even the best-written, best-directed story couldn't turn the show around now. Janet Fielding said that often the cast were told to improvise a sense of fraughtness or urgency for the sake of engaging the casual viewer. Scene-running orders were often unclear, so it was about making every scene dramatic, resulting in all the horrid histrionics on screen. Notably, the same approach seemed done in 1981's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy TV series, which was incredibly jarring. It's the only incarnation of Hitchhiker in which Ford is an unlikable hothead. But J&T clearly thought this approach worked, and the Twin Dilemma seemed to consist of nothing else but histrionics, so he clearly thought he had achieved what he did best, projecting his volatile personality on screen. Arguably, J&T's workaholic lifestyle was impairing his judgment heavily, in a way mirrored frequently in the Doctor's own catastrophic judgment. Eric Saywood describes J&T often sleeping in his office after returning jet-lagged from overseas conventions. Sleeplessness and his notorious alcoholism all adding up to severely impaired judgment and stories that even looked chemically run, volatile, reckless, directionless, morbid, incoherent, and shambolic. J&T wanted to appear in control and like he knew where the show was going, but he didn't. Mark Strickson says J&T was insecure, coming from a not-so-privileged background and trying to prove himself amidst the BBC higher-ups. Whilst J&T's memoirs don't exactly paint him as introspective or self-critical, perhaps his desire to leave early demonstrates conscious awareness that he might ruin it by staying too long. But the Twin Dilemma was a product of arrogant hubris. J&T by now thought the show was indestructible. It's almost unfathomable that he still believed this story was exemplary 20 years later. But if, say, he'd made the same praise about Mind Warp, that would make sense. Production-wise, it's solid and contemporary. It utilises Colin's ability to play the villain of the piece, emphasising the beauty and importance of the Doctor's heroism through its absence. Like when Perry doesn't have the Doctor to help her subdue Syl's men, so she starts firing recklessly. It brings the retro style of Flash Gordon perfectly into the age of yuppiedom, corruption, and exploitation. Mind Warp is what the Twin Dilemma should have been. J&T just didn't see how the Twin Dilemma was so utterly behind the times in terms of look, pacing, and characterisation. The Twin Dilemma is Doctor Who as modelled on cheap, melodramatic old sci-fi sci-fi B-movies about anything to update the style, J&T was behind the times and conceived the Sixth Doctor as an old-fashioned masculine pulp hero, typically belligerent, standoffish, and caddish. As Lawrence Miles argued, such characters may be one-dimensional and frowned upon now as regressive dinosaurs, but they were also iconic and tapped into culture in its rawest form. This is probably what J&T wanted, for this Doctor to be iconic and make a sharp, unforgettable impression by being volatile, aggressive, confrontational, and distinctively dressed. He had such faith that this Doctor would be such an iconic enigma and that ending the season with his shocking debut would create audience intrigue. RTD used the same approach for the Ninth Doctor, which worked and captured the public's interest, although I personally disliked Eccleston's thuggish belligerence. There's something insidious and reassuringly affirming about such a figure, so what went wrong with Colin? What adventured that gradually on TV, he became the very reassuring figure that the times needed. His pomposity and Kantian nature could be comforting in a fractured, contemptful, defeated society that was anything but comforting. Certainly he was more reassuring to the times than his ineffective, pious, appeasing predecessor who forced the taste of defeat and inadequacy down our throats. But the twin dilemma offers no real comfort. Many say the moment where the Sixth Doctor rubbishes his predecessor's feckless charm is contentious, mean-spirited. It can only be appreciated if you disliked Davison too. I think the scene was meant to poignantly reaffirm Davison's loss, for the Fifth Doctor really has gone, and this new guy is someone else, someone cold and callous in a way that'll take some getting used to. You'd be forgiven for thinking he will later win us over and prove himself an affirming hero, but it doesn't happen. All the worst histrionics and excesses propel the story in completely the opposite direction. Is 100% petty nastiness with barely a glimmer of endearing charm. Nothing is nurtured about the new Doctor in this poisoned soil. If every single opportunity is taken to force cranky, childish tantrums over nothing. The final closing line, whether you like it or not, sums up the 80s really, a confrontational age of political polarization and hyperbole. Do or die, you're either with us or against us. Much of 80s cinema and TV was so belligerent, confrontational and racked with overkill that watching it could make a moderate viewer feel queasy and ill even now. And if J&T's working model being very Thatcherite in terms of cult of personality, media manipulation, and rejecting the old radicals as dead wood, we weren't going to get the Doctor we needed, the middle ground between Colin and Davison. In the 80s there was no middle ground. Davison's era, in keeping with the reactionary times, had a castrated, apolitical, straight-laced schoolteacher type of Doctor, but rebellion became fashionable again in 1984 amidst Terminator, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and minor strikes. So the Doctor gradually returned to being a rebel again, and now he championed cheap and shallow ideals. Significantly, he was still heavily castrated in Warriors of the Deep and Resurrection of the Daleks, which are both season 20 leftovers. Unfortunately, in this reactionary climate, the rebel Doctor was portrayed as more of a danger to his friends and allies to his enemies. Maybe the in-universe reasons why this happened are the events of the Keeper of Traken. The Master's enhanced psychic abilities allowed him to briefly control the Doctor and then telepathically stalk him throughout Logopolis, so a survival instinct compelled the Doctor's consciousness to go into retreat and withdrawal throughout the Fifth Doctor's life to prevent the Master sensing him, but at the loss of his strength of character and decisiveness. In this fragile mental state, he could only cope with the volatile nature of the universe by denying it and believing that non-violent resistance could work and diffuse conflict. Various violent events and failures, the Master's death in Planet of Fire and the traumatic regeneration, combined to finally unleash all the repressed essence and fury of the Doctor, but it all emerges volatile and unstable. But he's back to being a proactive, pragmatic hero. Perhaps Davison and Colin fans will always do this dance. If you loved Nice Guy Davison, then your dislike of Colin's meanness makes you appreciate Davison even more. But if you hated Davison's sanctimonious, ineffectual preaching, then Colin's arrival and kicking ass is a moment of victory. I'd say that, despite the Twin Dilemma's awfulness, it wasn't the wrong direction for the show. Frankly, the Fifth Doctor's warped moralising would be far uglier without the balance of Colin's amorality. There's potential in this new Doctor, and frankly, Season 22's ratings and quality were no worse than Season 21's. J&T went to great lengths to appeal to fandom, but he was finally listening to the right kind of fan when Colin Baker suggested rebuilding the Doctor's mystery and ambiguity. It's actually unsurprising, but J&T thought Colin was a winning choice who understood the character and could entertain a crowd. The Twin Dilemma was audaciously thrilling on paper, replacing the kindly hero with a cold, ruthless, foreboding void, leaving us with no comfort zone and doubting everything we previously assumed. Preempting our revelation of the Daleks' mind warp and impossible astronaut were unforgettably frightening examples of how strange, sour, and acidic this unique show can be. The problem is sheer overkill excess. It's far from being thrilling, it's exhaustingly obnoxious and painfully clunky. The Doctor's unsteadiness is so relentless and obstinate that it kills all momentum. These insane fits by nature don't add to his character. Iskova claims that the code was the problem. Fans often try making one superficial design disaster the sole issue. Besides, I never minded the code, but it's true that one wrong ingredient can make the whole character fall apart, just like if Davison making the character excessively whiny, pig-headed, self-aggrandizing, and self-pitying kind of ruins the whole mysterious, cold, apprehensive vibe you're going for. The iconic character completely falls apart and ceases to work then. The Twin Dilemma's aims can be appreciated now, but only from a vast distance. Back then, like so many curative measures to keep the country going, it simply had to serve for the moment.